Alright guys, welcome to part 2 of the WRX wide body project. And the paint materials I'll be using are Omni. It's the entry level line for PPG. So there's the flex to add to the primer and the clear. That's a hardener for the primer, hardener for the clear. And those first two are the base coat and the primer, and then we got some 2.1 clear coat. Okay, so we're starting a plastic repair on the bumper, all those broken tabs. So I have some 80 grit sandpaper right now to scuff up the plastic to help the epoxy adhere. So I really want to get like inside the crack and in behind too. Just want to make sure all the surrounding areas will adhere properly to the epoxy. This one was pretty broken. That one I'm gonna have to melt to get it to like seal up pretty well. Usually do that with a soldering iron, and just using some wax and grease remover to clean the parts that I sanded just before we put the epoxy on. And before I put the epoxy, you're gonna use some plastic adhesion promoter. This is also from PPG. It's their one choice, and again, it's their entry-level line. It's pretty affordable, and it works really well. So you just want to spray it on the top, and really want to get in behind too. Make sure you cover all your areas. And you don't want to put this stuff on too heavy. Usually if you get runs with the plastic adhesion promoter, you'll have problems with peeling primers or paints later on. And the plastic epoxy I'm using is by 3M. It's you mix it 1-to-1. It's a two-part, like every other. I've used the Lord Fuser in the past, and they both smelt the same, so I assume they're the same product, and they seem to work just as well. No problem so far. Actually, I stopped that Canadian Tire on the way to work that day and picked those up because I didn't have any on hand, and I think it was about $11 or $12 for that, and I used very little, so I'll still have a lot left. I don't know if I would recommend it for doing like a big repair in a bumper, but for a small repair it should work just fine. It might be more like cost efficient to buy the bigger bottles, but for this it'll work. So just putting the epoxy, a little bit on the front, a little bit on the bottom, try and get it into the crack really well, and really want to, and then you have to let it sit for, I think after half an hour. It was pretty solid. I didn't sand it until right before I was ready to prime, but I started sanding the bumper pretty much right after I applied this. Okay, now we're gonna get to fixing the road rash on the bottom of the bumper. Looks like it was scraping quite a bit before. So I have some 120 grit on my orbital sander, and we're gonna wet sand it because when you sand raw plastic, it always seems to gum up pretty quick, and sometimes it'll get really fuzzy, and that can build up on your sanding disc and actually cause deeper scratches, which are really hard to get out. So you want to keep it really wet and just keep sanding until the scratches come out. So there you can see as like I'm just adding more water and I'm wiping it away to look at it. But I find on plastic it's really time consuming if you want to get the job just right. And I mean, you could go down to 80 grit, but you could run into problems with deep scratches that will just take even longer to get out. And once you prime, sometimes you prime over it and the primer just kind of like all like fuzzes up, and then you have more time to sand the primer. And here I'm just showing that how bad the bumper is. Even after sanding it, all the previous paint job is just like peeling off with air. I had to almost like strip this bumper down to raw plastic. It took a lot longer than I was expecting. So this is one of the fenders. Had a little dent on the front, and I pounded it out in the back pretty well, and instead of adding filler, like since this thing had been painted 3 times, I had enough product that I could just block out. So I have some 120 on a block right here, and just going over it until the dent comes out. Now I'm switching over to 220 because the dent's pretty much out now. I just want to get rid of the 120 sand scratches before priming. And I always block a little bit further with my 220 just to make sure that all the 120 sand scratches are out and they won't cause problems in the primer or show up later on. You really want to get those deep scratches out even before you put in like filler and such, because over time the filler or primer could sink into those scratches and you'll see them like come out right through the paint and clear coat. And now I'm just putting some wax and grease remover on the repair and this kind of acts like a clear coat, and you can look at it in the reflection and it'll tell you if that dent is gone. It almost looks like the final product of what it would look like once it's painted and cleared. And I didn't record the whole priming process because I didn't want to get my GoPro all full of overspray, but just showing a little bit of primer, doing my last coat on the fenders, and this is my first time using the Omni primer and I really liked it. Laid down really well. I only reduced it about 5% because I wanted some build, because there's still a few rock chips, and especially on the bumper I wanted to get a lot of build on it. And actually the mix I have in the gun right now is a different mix. I didn't add flex to this primer, but I did add the flex to the primer on the bumper and the fog light covers. And here's everything all primed. Still not 100% dry, but I just wanted to show you guys what it all looked like. Looks like everything turned out pretty well. So far, pretty happy with this product, and we'll see how it goes. And I was told by my supplier that the clear coat is like pretty top notch, really glossy, really durable. So we'll see how that holds up in our winters with all the gravel we put on the roads. And I know the owner of this car does a lot of ski trips, so hopefully it holds up pretty well. I'll also be adding some flex to the clear, and that should help deter rock chips as well. So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more updates.